Yeah, I'm just going to introduce Bob. Lovely, lovely Bob. So I said to him, I'm going to introduce you and tell everybody how I've met you, and then you can take over from there. So I met Bob in a mastermind group, which was all for speakers. So we were all trying to hone in on our speaking skills. Bob didn't need to, so I'm not really sure why he was there, but because he's amazing. But I met Bob, and I remember him telling me that he had made parts that were on something going in space to Mercury. Here you go. This is like a non-scientific description. He's laughing at me. And that it's on its way right now to Mercury. And Bob was instrumental in everything that happened with it. And it's got to do something really special when it gets there. Bob, was that all right, do you think?
Yeah, that's close enough.
So I want to introduce everybody to the fabulous Bob Ferguson, who's going to be our guest speaker tonight. Bob, over to you.
Yeah, smashing. Thanks very much, Jules. The yeah, the mastermind group originally, its focus was to try and get us more speaking gigs, but I'm not sure it quite achieved that. But
We
in the
made some great
process,
friends, didn't we?
we did absolutely. It was a good group. I'm not sure how effective it was, but we enjoyed ourselves anyway.
We did.
So that's really good. Hello, folks. So, what I'm going to talk about tonight is about some public speaking, how you can use public speaking to raise the profile of your business, how it can help you get noticed and attract business. But in particular, I want to talk about the role of stories for us as speakers, because it holds a really important place. But what I'd really like is to get an idea, if I was to talk to you about speaking in public and using stories, what your feelings about that would be, and if you've had any experience, because it will give me an idea where you are at the moment or what you're thinking about. So perhaps if we could just run across the top of the row as I've got it and ask you just, a minute or that sort of length would be absolutely perfect. Angie, could we start with you, please? We'll go to Jane last because she's still munching dinner. Angie, could we start with you, please?
Yeah, hi everybody. I don't have any, I'm quite vocal and in your face anyway, so I don't have any problem with public speaking. It's never fazed me. Getting your story right would. So if you haven't got your story right, you can easily stumble. You do need to engage people. And I think and Jules, it's interesting when you said that, because that's part of what Jules's topic's been this week, hasn't it? Is the stories and your niche and things. So yeah, getting your story right is a must for me.
All right, fantastic. That's good. Tina, how about you? Without the halo this time.
No halo. I'm sitting in the dark. So public speaking, I don't really have that much of an issue with it, but I'm not a storyteller. I wouldn't say I'm a storyteller in my my public speaking has been more around presentation type format in a corporate world. So and in that space, did I really storytell? No, I don't think I did. And it probably wasn't a thing as it is now. Like now, whenever anyone talks about public speaking, it's all about storytelling. Yeah, so that's it really. I'd love to learn how to storytell much better, hence being here.
All right, well, you get plenty of that this evening, so that would be good. Sue.
Well, yeah, I'm a teacher by trade originally, so I'm used to standing up and doing assemblies and things like that. Whether I use stories then, I'm not quite sure. It's too long ago to remember. Oh. But when I got made redundant, voluntary redundant, I went into winemaking, and I used to do WIs and things like that, and then the story would come in about how I'd got into winemaking and what I was doing and how you made wine. It was always a demonstration and drinks at the end, so they were quite happy.
Yeah, fantastic. I give speakers tips, and one of my tips is that if you want to improve your enunciation, you should speak for about a minute with a wine cork in your mouth, and it stops you using the jaw to drive your enunciation. It makes the face muscles work much harder. But I think everyone loved that tip because they thought they had to empty the wine bottle first. And I do point out that that doesn't help your enunciation generally, but anyway. So that's good. Are you still in the wine industry at all?
No, I'm retired, officially retired. But so what I do, raise charity funds.
Yeah, okay. So Angie seems to have hopped in and hopped out. I don't know if she's looking for two goes, but she's hopped further down the queue. So John is the next one who hasn't been before. John, what's your experience and feelings like?
Hi, Bob. Well, until I left my corporate career about 10 years ago, you would not have caught me speaking publicly at all. But since I started my own business, I realised I had to pull on my big boy pants and start doing it. I'm not brilliant with stories, and I have to say I'm getting increasingly upset with Jules, because first of all she puts Sandra on, then she puts you on doing about stories, and I'm on next week, so I'm, you know, she's just lining me up for a massive fall.
That's not true. That's
no, I'm sure it isn't. All right, so that's really good. And at the moment, the strong image that's coming out is it's about writing and delivering the stories that's more important to you than the public speaking side, which is great. But I think I may still have some tips that might help you when it comes to delivering your stories and your speeches. Now,
Jane, who's Jane?
Jane is the last one, I think. Oh, and Jane's with us. She's moving.
I am
now.
with you. I
Yeah,
am.
Put your dinner down, or have you finished, Jane?
I put it down just to speak to you, Bob. So I might have to go back on non-video because I've got syrup sponge pudding for dessert.
Oh,
I'm afraid.
don't tell
No,
me
that doesn't wait for no man. So anyway, so in terms of public speaking, in my previous life, I was extremely experienced in terms of corporate public speaking. I was wheeled out numerous occasions, and I have spoken in front of national and international audiences. So, but it was all with either a very scripted, because I was the front of the corporate, or if I was speaking specifically on my subject area or my team, I was allowed to build in storytelling, but it was still quite prescribed.
Yeah.
But since I've left and now I'm coaching and using techniques within the coaching where storytelling is appropriate, I'm applying that more in terms of when I do speak to groups, whether it's webinars or, you know, networking, or where I have done a few talks on my subject matter. So it's a new world, not having necessarily the support of the corporate structure. But it does mean I can be me rather than what they write for me.
Yeah, okay, fantastic. And being you is really important, I think, when you're speaking, that it's your character. And the reason I think it's so important is that it's still an adage that's in business: people buy from people. It doesn't matter where we go to, whether it's on the internet or what have you, people buy from people. And that's because we make very quick judgments as to whether we trust people or not. And prospects are incredibly swayed by emotion, and that was never the case. So we're going to have a look at the background and see where it comes from, because somebody said that it was recent, and I think that was Sue, wasn't it? Say that stories are a much more. I know Tina.
No, it's me. Yeah, it was me.
Yeah. And you don't have to mute yourselves, by the way. You can ask questions as we go along if you want to. That's absolutely fine. Interject. And you're absolutely right that it's a very current thing. And yet, if you go back, most of the world's religions have used stories to control people. If you go back to perhaps 500 BC, which was the start of Judaism, Bible was written about that time, although I think individual books were earlier. And they were used to give the population examples of what were good and what was bad behavior, and basically to keep them in line just through stories. But it goes back even earlier. If you go back another 2000 years BC, the Greeks, when they developed myths and mythology, Greek and Roman mythology, that was all about giving people examples of what would anger the gods or what would not anger the gods to keep them in control. And then, quite interestingly, I guess, I don't know, perhaps 16th, 17th century, we started to educate people better, and rhetorical training dropped out of the curriculum because we were becoming so learned and we had written text. We didn't need these stories. And that's how it laid until about 1995. And before 1995, if you'd have asked people why they made decisions, they'd have told you it was down to logic. You know, they worked out the rational thing to do, and that's the way they made decisions. And the bloke who upset the apple cart was a bloke called Antonio Damasio, who wrote a book called Descartes' Error. And basically Descartes' theory was that the body and the mind were different. And Damasio discovered that, in fact, the body informs the mind. The mind takes a lot of its information from the body, something he called somatic markers, but we probably call gut feel, that people will respond to gut feel. And one of those gut feels, those quick decisions they make, is whether they like you and whether they think they can work with you. And that builds up from the what we tell them. And so when we talk about stories, stories carry emotion, and emotion is the bit that sways people. So stories have become incredibly important now since Damasio came out. And getting this emotion over when you're wanting people to be persuaded is very powerful. And the chap who proved that for us was a chap called Jonathan Hyde, and he came up with a great analysis. And yet he didn't make it famous. It was made famous by a couple called Chip and Dan Heath, who wrote a book called Switch, and they talked about his model in there, and it became famous because they sold a lot of their books. And what he said was that the two parts of our brain, the logical part and the emotional part, can be represented by an elephant with a rider. And the elephant is the emotion and the rider is the logic. So when the elephant is nice and calm and going down the path, the rider can steer it and the elephant will go where the rider tells it. And that's what happens when everything's nice and calm and we can take our time. Logic can tell us which direction to go in. But if the elephant charges, the rider becomes a passenger. They have almost zero influence on what's happening. And I think you've probably all seen that. If any of you seen people when the red mists come down, logic is absolutely useless to them. See, and I love it if you go in the store and you see someone who's irate, he's taking something back and in a real rant, and the mists have come down, you can see they're in emotional state. And they say, you know, we want this thing replacing. And the hapless assistant on the other side says, oh, it's not our policy, sir. And what that's like is like having an elephant charging down the road and the rider standing in front of them holding the hand up saying, no, you can't go any further. And of course the rider just gets splattered as the elephant goes over the top. So what we want to do, if we want to persuade people, is we want to get that elephant charging, because when the elephant's on the charge, people will follow it. And if we can get that elephant emotionally connected to what we want them to sell or get involved with or build a relationship with, then the logic will not be stopped. The logic will fall in line. And we still need logic. We still need logical arguments. We still need logical reasons why you should do something. But that's just purely there for them to justify the decision they've just made. And if you're ever unsure about that, just ask someone who's got a sports car why they buy it. And they'll tell you that it holds its price well, and its road handling's good, and its cornering's good, and it's good miles per gallon. What they won't tell you is just that they felt so cool driving it down the road, which is the real reason they bought it. So we want to engage that emotion, and stories are our prime route into that. So are there any questions so far, any observations or any examples that you've seen that you think, oh yes, I've seen that in action? Is anyone still awake? I'm just checking because it's very quiet.
It's really spooky, Bob. It's Jane here, because I've just literally written a task for one of my coaching clients based on the elephant and rider, and I've literally finished it today.
All right. And that, you know, it's just a great motivator. If you can get the emotional side connected, it is so much more powerful than the logical side. And that's a great use for it as well. That's to motivate them, is it?
Yes, and to be able to address their goals and be motivated on their goals.
Yeah, fabulous. Yeah, great way to motivate people. Anyone else got any observations? Well, no. Well, I want to show you an example of it working and why we should steer away when we're talking about our businesses to audiences, why we should steer away from facts and focus on emotion. And what I'm going to show you was at some stage an advert. I think it was an advert in India. You don't see it very often in this country, but it is on YouTube. You can watch the original again if you want. It's only a couple of minutes, but it is produced by probably one of the world's most powerful organizations. They are a big technology company. They have computers that are probably off the planet compared with what most people think computers are. They have some of the very brightest talent and people available to them, and they have huge resources in finance and other access. And they're advertising their brand, and you will hear them mention absolutely none of that. Well, what they're going to do is hook their brand to emotion. So I'm going to share the screen with you now. And Jules, I'll ask you to sing out if you don't see something.
Okay, Bob.
Right. I will remember to press the share button this time.
Yeah, you're sharing.
ये मैं, ये यूसुफ, लंगोटिया यार सी मेरा। लाहौर में हमारे घर के सामने एक बड़ा बाग था। उस बाग का गेट बाबा आदम के जमाने। रोज शाम को हमने वहाँ पतंगे उड़ानी और उसके बाद जाके यूसुफ की दुकान से झजरिया चुरा के खानी।
झजरिया?
और मेरा साहब नमस्ते। नमस्ते। मेरी पोती मुंबई वाली। और बेटे क्या हाल है?
फांदे छोटी छोटी मीठी चोरी गांठ लेके बांधे।
हेलो अस्सलाम वालेकुम।
फाजिल स्वीट्स?
हाँ जी। दादाजान, दिल्ली से किसी की कॉल है।
हेलो।
यूसुफ अंकल?
कौन?
जी मैं सुमन बोल रही हूँ दिल्ली से, आपके बचपन के दोस्त बलदेव जी की पोती। याद है बचपन में आप दोनों झजरिया चुरा के खाते थे?
बचपन की तंग गली फिर से कूदे फांदे छोटी छोटी मीठी चोरी गांठ लेके बांधे। एक पतंग सा उड़ता था परिंदों की तरह, परिंदों की तरह, परिंदों की तरह। एक दौर था मन मन मोर था, एक दौर था मन मन मोर था।
पार्टीशन के वक्त हम रातों रात हिंदुस्तान आ गए।
दादू?
यूसुफ थी बड़ी आजादी।
कागजों की कश्तियों में डूबा रहता था, झांकती खिड़कियों में उलझा रहता मोर था एक दौर था मन मन मोर था
भैया थोड़ा जल्दी
मन मोर
हाँ जी कौन हैप्पी बर्थडे यारा यूसुफ वो यूसुफ मेरे बल्लू यूसुफ यार
Oh my goodness, Bob, I am blarting.
Yeah, I've seen that many times, so I've become less affected by it because of the number of times I've seen it. But the first times I saw that, that's a hugely emotional connection. What about other thoughts from people watching it? How did you feel as it went through?
I was getting annoyed actually. I
Were you?
wanted to know what it was all about. I couldn't understand it. It's
All
like
right.
a lot of modern adverts. You sit there and you watch and you say, what on earth were they advertising?
Right.
We often say this together, you know, when we're watching adverts. What on earth was that about?
Right. If you're watching a TV advert, they've got two communication channels. They've got sound and they've got visuals, and quite often they're playing different tricks with both of them when you're watching them. So there's a couple of things that can happen. Number one is that you cannot be aware of what's happening, but they're hitting you with a brand as they want it. But the second thing that can happen is you might not be their target audience, and subsequently they don't care whether it makes sense to you. And I think this is a really valuable lesson when you're going out speaking. If you're using speaking to raise your profile, or even if you're talking with people, the only people that really matter are the people who want to build a relationship with you in some sense. So they're interested in what you're doing, they want to take it further. If what you're saying isn't of interest to somebody who isn't interested in using your services, then that's really good news, because it will save you wasting your time in there. So if you don't understand an advert, it's quite commonly because you're not the target audience. They don't want to reach you with this advert. And they are very selectively targeted, those adverts. Any other thoughts when you were watching it?
It was just really emotional, wasn't it? You got very involved in the story,
Yeah.
and then you could see that, you know, they wanted to get them together, they wanted to have that connection, but all the technology that was around that enabled them to do that at their fingertips.
Yeah,
And,
but you never get any explanation of what's behind it, do you? You just
No.
see them using it,
yeah,
which
Yeah,
is
noticed that.
yeah, which is a really important concept, because, but particularly for me, because I work a lot with technical people, and they love to tell the audience facts because they've got lots and lots of facts in their head, and they think the audience should too. But in fact, the audience just want to know what's in it for me. How does it affect me? And that's what that advert was showing. What's in it for me if I use Google? And I think another interesting bit in there is you notice that, and I think the NLPers call this anchoring. When it gets to the end and you get the peak emotional bit where the two hug, and Jules must have loved that bit.
I did.
Yeah, I thought you might have done. Where the two hug and it becomes really emotional, that's when they hit you with the brand name. Straight after that, you've got that warm feeling, and they hit you with the brand name because they want you to anchor those emotions to their brand, that good feeling of what they can do.
Bob, I just think this is so fascinating. I know I'm quite obsessed with psychology and people, and I know that's why I connect with it so much. But one of the things that happened for me, and I haven't seen that before either, was I was absolutely aware immediately it was Google. It's really interesting. I honed straight in on how they were getting the story and piecing it together. And what does that say about me in terms of me totally getting what brand I was being advertised, you know, immediately, if that makes sense?
So going back to what I just said to Sue, it may be one of two things. It may be your own personal development has allowed you an insight, because I get the same thing when I watch films. You know, I can see what they're doing in films. In fact, my wife detests me at Christmas because when you get boy loses girl, I say, don't worry, it's 20 minutes, they'll be back together again. She says, shut up, I want to be sad. So you do see a lot more because you work a lot more with it. But the other thing might be, you might just be in the target audience that they're trying to reach. And so it's designed for you to get it in there.
Yeah, it was great. And I definitely am a Google customer. I use it all day long for all sorts of things. So yeah, I think you're right. Yeah. It's really interesting, Bob.
But
I love the anchor bit that you talk about.
Yeah, the way they anchor the brand to emotions.
Yeah.
And it happens a lot. I've got another example of Warburton's Bread, where they use the theme music for Air Force One, very powerful music. And when it's at the emotional peak of it, that's when they hit you with the brand name Warburton's Bread. This whole thing is about a sliced loaf. I can't get over it. But it's to anchor your emotions so that when you're walking around the supermarket and you see the Warburton's Bread, those warm emotions come flooding back, and you throw it in the basket. So, any other thoughts before I move on?
I think the thing that with that, I can hear really bad feedback, sorry. The thing about it is, when you look at that, and I was emotionally attached to the story, and I just wanted to keep watching to see where it was, like, you know, where it's going, but I'm still, you know, wanting to see the end of the story. When I then flip the thought into how do I incorporate that emotional attachment to my own business, or connecting hearts and minds with my business, that's when I'm kind of like, oh, that's all kinds of struggle. Like, how do I do that? So that's the bit for me where, like, I get it, you know, I get how they've done it, I get all of the things you've described, but then when I try and think about how I do that, achieve that with my own business, that's when I'm kind of like, no, I'm lost.
Okay, so that's a perfect lead, Tina, because that's just about what we're going to discuss in the next few minutes, about how we take a story structure and start to put our business on top of it so that it comes out with the same sort of effects. What about challenges? What challenges do you think we've got delivering to people at the moment?
Cutting through the noise.
Yeah, noise is a big challenge for sure. Any others?
And actually, sorry, the other thing is the emotional piece at the moment, because people, you know, are in a critical change dynamic with COVID, the distraction. So it is noise in terms of the volume of things that are out there and cutting through the noise, but also from a psychological perspective, where human beings are at the moment is in quite a challenging place again to connect.
Yeah, they've already got some powerful emotions going on, haven't they? So you're trying to combat powerful emotions with powerful emotions, which can be a big challenge. Associated with the noise, I would say, is people have very short attention spans. You've got a short time to get them hooked into what you want to say in order to go forwards. They won't give you a whole lot of time. Advertising, if you go, and we had a minute at the beginning, a minute is a fairly short time, but if you go to a networking event, they'll typically give you a minute to talk about your business. And it's sort of like the peacock mating ritual of business, that the peacock has to fan the tail, and it has to attract the attention of the mate fairly quickly. Otherwise they drift off, they lose interest and they drift off. And I think people in the networking group are like that. When you talk to them, you've got a very short time to get that message over, and you've got to speak with impact in order to do that. And one of the ways that you do it is when you understand your story, you'll see how we start to fragment it, so you don't have to deliver it all the time, because that would take up too much time. You'd lose your audience by doing that. So what sort of things have we got to say that attract people's attention when we talk? What sort of things are we looking for? Suggestions? No suggestions.
Can you, I was just jotting a note, but can you repeat the question, Bob?
I can. What sort of things do you think we need to say around what areas when we're speaking to people to start to attract their interest fairly early on?
I think you mentioned it earlier. It's kind of the what's in it for me point.
Yeah, absolutely. Key benefits. But then when they hear what's in it for me, they're going to want to go a bit further. What sort of other information do you think we can give? Have we got any ideas up there? No,
Bob,
how about,
can I say, would it be about stepping into their world of how they're feeling right now?
yeah, absolutely. Empathy. So empathy is one of the key anchors of trust. When we show that we understand the situation they're in to a deep level and we're empathetic to it, then it starts to build trust, and people won't deal with us until they feel some level of trust. So that understanding their world and the challenges they've got is really important. Anything else we can think of? No? I'll give you a lead, shall I? The second thing you really want to establish is credibility, because people will want to know that you're a person that they can deal with and trust to deal with the problem. And so they'll want to see some level of credibility. And the third bit, which often seems to get skipped over when I listen to people talking in networking groups, is value. You've got to be able to express your value so that the people listening think, ah, yeah, I can see why it's a benefit to use you. And certain groups of people find that very hard to do. I know certainly from my background in engineering suck at it. We are terrible at it. They hate to blow their own trumpet, and some other groups hate to do it as well. But in the end, if you don't believe in your own business enough to shout about it, it's hard to get other people to believe in your business too. And some years ago, I went to a wedding with my wife, and I was a bit miffed, to be honest, because she was the principal speaker of the day and I wasn't. And this is a very strange occurrence in our household. But she knew the bride very well. It was the bride's second marriage. And so she was on the top table with the bride, and I was put to a table to the side of the top table. And I was with a lady called Nicola, who had done all the flowers for the wedding, and they were beautiful flowers. And just in general conversation, I said to her, she said it was her own business, and I said, how's your business going? And she sort of gave me one of those sickly grins and went, fine, you know, that makes you think it must be anything but fine. And I never want to miss a coaching opportunity. So I started to say, so what, you know, what don't you like about your business? Which challenges have you got at the moment? And she said, oh, the problem is that when I get to the bride and groom, they've already paid for the church, they're paid for the honeymoon, they're paid for the reception, they're paid for the DJ, and they're running out of money. And they think that all I do is shove flowers on a table and it should be cheap. And she said, but the reality is I have to go round to their house and I take my colour swatches and I look at the bridesmaid's dress and I match them with the colour swatches and I take the right colour swatch to the florist and I make sure the flowers match the dresses and then I arrange them all on the tables. But she said, they never seem to appreciate it. And I said, have you ever told the bride and groom when you get round there what's involved in your job so that they understand what they're buying in your expertise? And she said, no, I don't do that. I said, but if you went round and told them everything that was involved and how you sort out the colours of the flowers so they're spot on with the bridesmaid's dress and all the rest of it, then they'd understand that you're not just sticking flowers on a table. And, you know, it's like a light bulb moment. I could see the light go on in her head. And she said, I get it. She said, if I explain what a challenge it is for me to make the colours match and all the rest of it, then they'll think I'm more valuable. And I said, you've got it. And just then, the bride, Judith, appeared, and she said, Nicola, she said, the flowers are beautiful. And Nicola beamed and said, it's nothing. All my pearls of wisdom wasted. But people do that so often. I see people in all sorts of industries who take for granted what they do, just shrug their shoulders and virtually say it's nothing because they take it for granted. They do it every day. It's commonplace. But it isn't like that to your clients. And if you're dealing with a problem that your clients are struggling with, then it's important to let them know what you do that's going to alleviate that. And the way we do that is through a story structure, the way we show them what's happening. Now, I mentioned the 3 things we want to cover, empathy, credibility, and value. However, those involve 2 different stories, and we shouldn't confuse them. What I'm going to do is show you how we connect through a story, and I want you to start thinking of your own story so that you can put your own bits on top of this. And to do that, I'm going to share the screen again. Right. I don't think we need the computer sound on this time. Have you all got that?
Yes, Bob.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
That's great stuff. Very, very high-tech graphic, this. Happiness on the top, sadness on the bottom. And this is the classic plot of what's called a hero's journey. But more importantly than that, this is the emotional journey that you go through on the hero's tale. And there are distinct parts to this story structure, but you can map your own business onto this. So it starts off with characters. We introduce the characters, and the characters nearly always have a flaw. And if it's our story, if we're talking about us, it's our flaw. That's what we should be looking for in the characters. And the character always desires something they haven't got. And things start going well. You can see the emotional profile rising there, and it goes up to a little peak, and that's good. We're feeling good. And then the second bit starts to happen. We get conflict. There's a problem. Something stops us getting what we want. And the conflict has to escalate. You can't just have a conflict that's static. So, for instance, when we talk about the Titanic, if you watch the film The Titanic, the conflict escalates because every time you see the ship, it's lower in the water. They are running out of time. And all the time they're running out of time, they're sliding down this slippery slope until they get to the point at the bottom. And this is the valley of despair down here. They're now wondering whether they've got what it takes to do things. And at that point, always interjects a trusted advisor to show them the cure. So here's their trusted advisor, springs up, tells them what to do, shows them how to get out of it, and because of a result of that, things start to change. They grow up the other side, and they change, and then they get to this final conclusion, triumphant conclusion. And normally, if you watch it in a film, you'll see that there's a medal ceremony or something at the end to reinforce the triumph that happens at the end. And that's the emotional profile that you'll see in most films. And so you can see here, if you look here, this peak here, boy gets girl, boy loses girl, boy gets girl back again. Right? And that all the Christmas films that I was talking about with my wife, that's the profile that you'll see. And I can see when they're down here, when the boy loses the girl, I know what's going to happen. Something's going to change and they're going to get back up here. It's fairly obvious. If you watch Star Wars, the trusted advisor in Star Wars is Yoda. when Luke Skywalker is doubting that he can do it, Yoda is the one who's there, who's encouraging him to use the Force and showing him how to do it so that he can change. And the trusted advisor role is really important, because this is a golden rule of public speaking. No one likes a smart aleck. So don't be a smart aleck and cure your own problems. The solution should always come from outside. And now if you go and watch films, you'll see that the solution comes from outside. Another thing that's really useful for you, and we'll sort of cover it a bit as we go with teases, is you can split this up. So if you wanted to produce a trilogy, say you were producing a newsletter to engage your clients, you could split it into 3 parts here. And that's just what they did in Star Wars. That was Star Wars. Empire Strikes Back was here when they left Han Solo in a block of carbon. And here's the end when the Empire, when The Last Jedi, Return of the Jedi, the last bit, when they finally beat them. Not everything quite follows this. If you're Shakespearean and you write a tragedy, Romeo meets Juliet, they both die. But this is not generally a good way to leave your audience. For your story, you want to put your business on top of this profile, how you learn to do what you do in order to help your client. And what that leads to is it leads to your empathy, because in this bit, you're in the low ebb that your clients might be feeling, so you know what they feel like. You're demonstrating you've walked their journey and you've got empathy. And also, as you climb out and achieve up here, it points to your credibility. So in your business story, start to think how that affects it. So for me, I was like, there weren't very many of you. I think there was. John, I think, was one, didn't like public speaking in corporate world. And when I started my engineering career, I detested public speaking. I would avoid it at every possible opportunity. And that's me on this neutral line at the moment. And then I realized that I had to do it. And I went to an organization called Toastmasters, and I polished the speaking, and suddenly I found I liked it, and I'm going up this curve, and I get to the top here. And this probably was 2002 for me, when I won my first international contest, and it sent me to America to the World Public Speaking Championships. However, the challenge I had was to write 2 new speeches, and it was a terrible time. The months after I won that championship there, I was just getting lower and lower, trying to recreate the flash of brilliance that I produced in the first speech. And when I was at this point, I was in America, and I was up against people who'd been rehearsing for about a month, and I'd finished my speech on the plane on the way over there. And needless to say, it didn't go very well. And I became really disconnected with the world of public speaking. So this was a very low ebb for me. And then I bought some tapes while I was out there. When I came back, I listened to them. I was probably disconnected and grumpy about it for about 3 months. I think my wife says it was 6, but I'm sure it was only 3. And I started to listen to the tapes again, and I realized that everyone had a process for writing speeches repeatedly, to being able to create quality. And that's what it was about for me, learning that process. Once I'd understood that from those tapes, I then started to build my own process up this side. And subsequently, I won another 2 UK and Ireland championships, and it opened a whole new career. So that ended up very successful, and that's where my credibility comes from. So just thinking of your own businesses for a minute, how would you take an audience on this journey? If you had to describe your journey in your own business, what points would you put in? And I'm going to drop out of here and see if anyone wants to share it at all. Has anyone had a similar cycle with their career? Can see how?
I have, Bob, but it's probably not the right time to say it now, because it'll spoil my thunder for next week.
All right, if you want to hold your powder dry,
but that's fab, because you've just written a talk for next week. Fantastic. Come back next week, everyone, and see how it works.
Okay, so that's good. And this profile is incredibly valuable. I use it time and time again. There's a number of things to remember about this. If I just go back to sharing it again for a quick second. I've read in some book somewhere, I can't remember where it was, they talk about heaven and hell. There's some exercise you have to do. The slave driver who wrote it, make sure you do it.
I've heard that's a really good book, Bob.
Oh, have you, Jules?
Yeah.
So this valley of despair down here is not hell. This bit up here is heaven for sure. Hell is somewhere down here. It's down lower than this valley of despair. And it's really important, because when you're talking about your services or your products to potential clients, that's where they may be now, that they may have challenges that you can solve. But it's really important to illustrate that if they don't take the cure then and go up that path, the path goes further down to a worse situation. So you need to understand that that's not hell. Hell is worse. And that make sure that you understand what your client's hell is, so that when you're talking about, you can say, yeah, I can see it's a tough position now, but believe me, it will get worse. They love it. Perhaps not. Anyway, so you need to know where heaven and hell is in order to describe that to them. But I said there were two stories. There's yours, and there's the client's story. Now you can use that same profile to write the story of your client. When the client gets down to that valley of despair, the trusted advisor is you. You do not want to be the hero in the client's story. The client does not want another hero. They don't want someone hogging the limelight. They want to know that they've got somebody they can go to and trust, who will help them climb out of that. So you need the two stories. And so as well as your own, you need to write a client story. You should fragment these into bits. Now, I always split my talks into 10-minute blocks. They don't have to be exactly 10 minutes. If someone gives me 25 minutes, I might do 3 6-minute blocks and compress them a bit. But the reason I write in blocks is because you don't always have the opportunity to talk to a client for the whole story. You can't always deliver the story. And so you've got to use a different technique. And understanding all the different blocks there. So on there, you've got, generally, there's 5 turning points in that story cycle. Some people call it 6 events, some call it 5 turning points. Depends whose model you read. They're all pretty much the same. But you need to understand those turning points so that you can start from anywhere. And that's the difference between story and narrative, because story stays the same. So a story is always a story. It starts at the beginning and it ends at the ends, and it flows through generally in a pretty chronological route. But narrative can start from anywhere and you can lead it in. So those of you who remember A Tale of Two Cities, starts with him on the cart heading for the guillotine, which is the end. He gets executed then. It is a far, far better thing I do and all the rest of it. But it starts you at the end, and then it takes you back in time to show you how that end came about. And that's the beauty of narrative, that we can chop up our story and we can deliver little bits when they're appropriate. So if you're talking to someone, they're talking about their challenge, and the challenge is in the conflict zone, you can deliver the little bit of your story that's about the conflict zone. You don't have to deliver the rest, not at this point. Just enough to hook them in and show them that you're empathetic to their cause and that you've seen that conflict before. I'm going to give you a couple of structures, because structures are the key to speaking, having good structures. And the first structure is the one they use in writing newspaper articles. this is great when you're going around meeting people rather than when you're stood on a stage. What they do when they write a newspaper article is they hit you with a headline, and the headline has to be a hook. It has to grab you. It has to be your reason for existence, what you do. So for me, I always say I help technical experts speak with confidence, clarity, and impact. And that's it. So short, punchy, what you do that acts as the first hook. The second level that you get in a newspaper is just the essential facts, the basics of what happened. And then underneath that, you get the nice to have detail that takes you a bit further. Now, the problem is if your whole story has a lot of detail and you try to tell it from the beginning to the end, remember one of the challenges was people are overloaded with information, they have short attention spans, they're not going to listen. The way to get them to listen is to tease them. So I talked about, you could write this as a trilogy. If you wanted to do, say, a blog, write your story as a blog. The first bit of the profile that's rising to the top is, I started off from a normal background and I rose, and this is where I got to, and I thought this was really good. But I didn't know that there were problems that lay in wait for me that will bring down your business. But I'll tell you about that next time. Ah, what? Next time? No, I want to know now. Tell me now. And people will tune in next time in order to hear what the pitfalls are that they mustn't fall into. And of course, that's exactly what soap writers do. Soap writers, and it, as a good guide, never stop when the action is complete. Always stop in the middle of something. I know that doesn't make good sense as an author, but always stop in the middle of something, because it always prompts the question, what happens next? I want to know what happens next. And that gives you the opportunity to tease them. So I'm going to show you the conflict. If you were talking to someone at a networking event and using your story, you might say, well, this is the situation I found, and thankfully I worked out how to overcome it. And just stop. Don't tell them. Don't feel compelled to tell them. I know it's a great compulsion, but don't do it. Because if they're interested and they're a potential client for you, they will almost certainly say, so go on, how did you solve it? And that says, I'm interested. I want to know more about your story. I'm giving you permission to tell me more. And then in that same example, you could take them down to the despair, the valley of despair at the bottom, and you could say, these are all the things that go wrong with your business, but thankfully we've got the tools that will help you put it right. And then stop again and see what they say. And if you've still got them hooked, they will say, so, you know, what do you mean? What tools? What can I get that will help me cure it? And then they're giving you more permission to tell another bit of your story. Whereas if you give them GBH of the ear holes by starting off and telling your story and just going through, you'll find they zone out after a while because they haven't given you permission to move on. So use that fractured approach where you start off just giving them the key information and then stop and wait for them to encourage you to go further. The second thing, if you're going to talk in front of a networking group, say you get typically something like 20 to 30 minutes in front of a networking group to do a talk, it's really great. You have to split it up. You have to split it up into chunks. I said I wrote in 10-minute parts, and 10-minute parts are absolutely critical. And the reason that they're critical is, oh, sorry about that. I was just going to change the background. The reason that they're critical is because it holds the audience's attention. Now, if you just speak to people in general, you get an attention span that looks like that. That's called the clothesline attention span. So they start off with good intentions, they're listening, and then gradually they start to work out where you're going and their attention falls down in the middle. And then they sense you're getting towards the end, so their attention picks up again because things are about to change. But if you split it up and make the splits hard, then what you'll do is ping their attention back every time you make a hard reset. And so their attention span starts to look like that. And the past masters of this are the James Bond franchise. They split up their films into 10-minute blocks, 10 minutes of action at the start, 10 minutes of story, 10 minutes of love interest with Bond, 10 minutes of the villain, 10 minutes of action. And so it goes on. And you'll see people coming out of a James Bond film and they'll be saying, oh, I didn't realize that that was 2.5 hours. Where's the time gone? And the reason they haven't had time to realize that the time's passed is because every time they've started to get bored, their attention has been changed back to something different. And so you should split it up into different sections and just deliver one bit at a time and then make a hard change. So in a 30-minute talk, I would typically do perhaps 3 or 4 points, a 5-minute introduction, a 5-minute outro, and then split it up hard so that every 6 or 7 minutes they were changing direction, and then they'll stay with you. Have we got any questions so far? When I say so far, I think we might be getting close to the end, but what questions have you got so far?
Just one thing that you said, Bob, that I didn't understand.
Right.
When you were talking about the curve, I don't know what you call the journey of the.
Oh no,
yeah,
the hero's journey.
Yeah, the hero's journey. Yes, yeah. I've put it journey on the hero's trail. I think I put.
All right, that's all right.
You then mentioned the solution should always come from outside.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
So, when you're telling your own personal story,
yeah,
your solution to how you got good should come from outside rather than from inside you. If you developed it inside yourself, find an outside source, someone who gives you wisdom, because it always looks a lot more plausible than if you find it yourself. If you find the solution yourself, people will say one of two things. They'll say, if you were so smart, how come you got into the problems in the first place? Yeah. Or secondly, they'll say, well, it works for you because you're a smart aleck, but it won't work for me. And you don't want them to say either. You want to be able to take external wisdom and convert it into you finding the way to change. Does that make more sense?
Yeah. Thank you. Sorry, I'm noting away here.
No, that's fine. Yeah.
I am a complete nerd.
That's good.
Not the only one. I've been writing it well.
Any other questions, folks?
Bob, it's probably because you're doing a good job, so everybody's like on it and they're just following it.
I think it needs a bit of while to take it in, actually.
Yeah, I think that's true, but I think the thing to start with is your own story. So my suggestions for your next step would be that, firstly, collect stories like they're gold dust. You will all have stories of clients who have found themselves in that valley of despair, and you as the trusted advisor have shown them the way out of there. The challenges that people face are normally threefold: internal, external, and philosophical. And what that means is there's normally an obvious challenge that they face that comes from the outside, but also equally they face an internal challenge. Am I good enough? Can I do this? But the philosophical one is quite important because that's where people like to act for the greater good. And I think, who was it? Sue, wasn't it?
I don't know.
Yes, I think you were saying you raise money for charity.
Yes, I was just going to ask you about that. Yeah.
So you're selling your quilts, aren't you, to raise money for charity?
Yeah. Quilts.
So what people are doing when they're buying your quilts are not really buying a quilt, although that may be something they want. They are doing something for a higher cause.
Yeah, so that I was going to say, which is my client then, the charity or the people buying the goods?
No, the hero is your customer.
Right.
And you're the trusted advisor. You're showing them a way that they can help this greater cause. What's the charity you're raising money for?
Wait for it. Alternating hemiplegia of childhood.
Right, have you got something shorter?
AHC, I told you, wait for it. AHC, it's a very, very rare genetic illness.
Okay.
There is no known cure at the moment.
Right, so when you're talking about the emotion, you want to be trying to touch emotions where they might have been in contact with anyone like that, or with children who have similar diseases, if that's very rare and they're not likely to come across it. But what you want them to feel is the emotion of children being helpless without a cure and needing help.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of people who will resonate with that. And then they're not seeing buying your quilt as a purchase of a quilt and how much is your quilt compared with a quilt in Tesco's, because they know the quilt in Tesco's is just funding the pockets of Tesco's. What your quilt is doing is allowing them to have a quilt, but also contribute to a higher cause.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You're the guide, you're the person who's going to show them how they can buy a quilt and help another, help a child or help find a cure for that.
Yeah.
And they are the hero. They may be the people who see children who are suffering without a cure and wondering how they can deal with it, how they can help.
Right. Thank you.
Okay. So gather your stories of where what you've done has helped, where you've acted as a trusted advisor that have helped people. Keep them in an archive. As an engineer, it won't surprise you, I keep mine in a spreadsheet, but I have over 600 now, and they're just a great source of gold when you're writing any presentation, to be able to say, so what sort of people have I got? What example have I got from similar people where I've helped them out of that situation? Prepare your own 2 stories so that you have your own story that gives you empathy with their situation and credibility, how you came to be good at what you do. But then you have to switch to a story that treats your customer as the hero and you as the trusted advisor. And write everything in blocks and record it. If you're speaking, not one-to-one in networking, but if you're speaking at a networking event, make sure you record absolutely everything. Because what you'll find is over a period of time, you'll build up a number of blocks. And when somebody says, oh, would you come and talk to my group about what you do? Instead of starting with a blank sheet of paper and thinking, oh, what am I going to say to this group? You'll be able to say, well, what did I do for a similar group? Let's go back and take that and customize it from this group. And it makes it so much easier. It makes it so much easier to remember. Because you're using stories, they're easy to remember anyway, so you haven't got a lot of material to remember. And it will just mean you can respond at very short notice. And in fact, when I go networking, I always go with 2 speeches ready in my pocket. So that if perchance, and I'm the only one who seems happy about this, but if perchance the speaker gets delayed on the motorway and can't appear, I'm ready to jump in and take their slot. And it gives you that flexibility because you've just got those blocks ready. And the people who run these events know me now, and I've had it happen a couple of times. I've pitched up and they say, oh, the speaker can't make it this morning. Would you do a talk? And it's just a great opportunity to raise the profile and explain to people what you do. And I don't want this to be confused with selling either. I know Jules rightly talks about building relationships. For me, these talks are marketing. You're not trying to hard sell what you do. You're trying to get your audience to go on the next step on the journey, which is probably to have a chat with you afterwards or to have a coffee with you later so they can find out a bit more about what you do. So you're not drilling down to a hard sell. you're giving them information that says, I can act as a guide for you in this situation. If this troubles you, let's have a chat. Any other thoughts, questions?
Angie, what did you write in the chat, my lovely?
Oh, chat. I haven't been. Oh,
You
there's
wrote
one.
green personality.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Sorry, I was still on mute. Sorry. Bob was talking about his spreadsheets and how he loves his spreadsheets. And I'm really into the different personalities.
Yeah.
So first of all, when you said you was an engineer, I clicked up there, green personality. And then when you said about your spreadsheets, and it was like, yeah, you've just got everything in an order. Everything is just in a very chronological order, isn't it?
Yeah, I like to have it organized.
Yeah.
And I think the thing about practice as well, people detest practicing speaking generally, but the thing that practice does is it allows you to have things ordered and organized, but without being too scripted, so that you still got that element of talking to people in a natural way. I personally use Merrill and Reed's Driver Analytical Amiable Extrovert rather than the colours, but you can overlay them, the two just ratchet round.
It's interesting because a different colour personality will do a different story in a different way, won't they? And I'm trying to just think how sometimes when I look at it, I think I haven't got a story. I don't know where my story would be on there.
You so have, Angie.
Yeah.
I know, but you feel lost in it in yourself, don't you? You think, well, where would my story be? But
so, what's your business about, Angie?
I'm a lawyer.
Right. Okay.
So because I do conveyancing, people come to me when they need me.
Yeah.
So they've already been to the agents, they've already decided they're going to buy or sell. But they sell for different reasons. It could be that it's a happy occasion, they're moving, or there could be a death or a divorce.
Yeah.
So there's different reasons why they need you. So yeah.
There is, but they all need a trusted advisor. And for your own story, how did you get into the law?
Well, I went to join the police force, and it was many years ago, and I was told I was too short to join the police force, so they suggested I went to the careers advisor, and so which they don't have anymore. So the youngsters on the call might not know what a careers advisor was, but
yeah, I do.
Was in those days. And they done a tick box exercise to say yes, no, and decided I should be in the law. So it wasn't my decision. No. I did want to be a police person, but that's because I didn't have a very good education in my schooling. So I thought, oh, well, I can be a policeman because I can just do the police exams and do it. And then all of a sudden I was embarking on a law degree.
Right, so you can stretch this profile in lots of different ways. How about your academic career before and what you had to do to get in the law?
Yeah.
So you must have had to do a lot of hard work if you say you didn't have a great education and you wanted to go in the police.
Yeah.
And so there must have been a lot for you to do. And who guided you through that?
Me.
Right, okay. So I would suggest rather than just you stick with a careers advisor, because
I never saw her again after that.
No, but the audience
I think they closed down after.
Because your journey started off and you left school and you were sort of reasonably comfortable, presumably, with wanting to be a police officer. So you're at the first peak, and then they told you were too short. So you're starting to go down the conflict path. But then, having been told you're too short, you didn't have a good academic record. And then when you were at the bottom trying to sort out what you wanted to do in the future, the careers advisor appeared and gave you the law. And the law must have seemed impossible if you didn't think you had a good academic record. And then somewhere you should have somebody who helps guide you through the process of picking up your academic record to be in the law. And that's the time when your passion for the law should come out, why you went down that route.
This is true, Angie. Bob, what you don't know is Angie was on my podcast today. We only recorded it today, so I found out a whole lot more about her.
Right.
So I know she's got a lot more stories than she thinks, but this is actually quite true. And I think as well, because of that kind of careers advice, as Bob says, that was the thing that inspired you to actually even look at that route. So even though it was you perhaps and your drive that got you past the exams, another thing I was thinking, Bob, is who was with you on that law degree? So did you do it alone, or actually did you have people around you, and did they influence you? So again, they might become part of that, I'm guessing, Bob.
Yeah, or even parents. You know, if you had parental influence that encouraged you and helped you move along that path.
No, I from doing that, I'd stepped out of our family comfort zone.
Right.
All I got then was, who do you think you are?
Oh, right. Okay. So that and right. So that can go into your story, because although I've drawn the upward slope from the cure through the change as a smooth line, in most films that isn't the case. When you think of the hero's quest, the hero doesn't suddenly go, oh yes, I've got it now and everything works. You'll find they go forward and they have some setbacks. They get knocked back. So one of your knockbacks can be your family thinking you were stepping above yourself by going into the law. And that's another challenge that you have to overcome. And somewhere, you've got the belief that you can make a good lawyer and you can make a difference as a lawyer.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? Because we do all have the story, but we don't all have the belief in what we've got, how we've got there.
Yeah.
To actually think that anybody's interested in that and it's a story or anything.
Yeah, though if you're a fan of the Simon Sinek world,
yeah,
you know, start with why.
Yeah.
It is the driving force. Anyone can go to see someone on a business meeting or a networking meeting and say, oh, I do what I do because it earns me money. That's not a motivation. But people who are motivated by something internal because they want to make a difference, because they wanted to be good in the law, they want to make sure people's house, you know, I don't know where it is now on the rankings, but I thought it was probably the second most stressful time of our lives, buying and selling houses. So to have a trusted advisor at a time when you're at the second most stressful time in your life is really important. And if you feel that's your difference is making sure not that just the law is catered for, because yes, the law has to be catered for, but that your client is seen through this stressful time with a minimum of distress, then that's a really important driver in your business. And I would say it's the same in Sue. You know, she's not selling quilts to sell quilts. She's selling quilts to achieve something far greater than selling the quilts. And this underlying why in what we do is an important factor in the way we put ourselves over.
And actually, Angie, just listening to you, I'm actually really intrigued by your story so far. So in terms of who's interested in it, well, I can definitely say, yeah, I want to know more. I want to know how you achieved getting your degree. Our stories are very similar, but that's for another day. To hear how you did that. You know, and then to move on to the bit what Bob says in terms of the role that you play now in people's lives is significant as a trusted advisor. So, yeah, I just wanted to say that.
Yeah. And there you go, you see, Angie, you don't realise how interesting it is for other people. That was Nicola's problems with the flowers. You know, just take it for granted that that's what they do. But there are some extraordinary stories in there. I know John's doing some stuff at the next meeting. But, you know, perhaps, Jules, that would be one of your meetings might do that, ask people to write their own stories and then come in and deliver it so that other people can listen to it with an independent ear and say what's interesting, what grabs them, so that when you're out talking at business events or networking events or whatever it is, you know which bits interest people and hook them in.
It's a really good idea, isn't it? It's a really good idea. And I would guarantee everyone has a bit of their story that somebody is interested in, and they don't
Absolutely.
realise it, do they, Bob? It's
No.
fascinating. I just want to also just say to Jane, because I know Jane's still here, I think. I know she's got her mute. I suspect you're not still eating, Jane. But Jane,
No, I'm not. I am here.
Jane I had a virtual couple with, which was really lovely because we'd kind of sort of passed in like ships in the night, I guess, on social media, and didn't really know, I didn't know so much about Jane. Jane had a really senior, high-level corporate career, didn't you, Jane?
I did, yes.
And you know, now she's in this lovely space where she's got her own business. She's an executive coach. I think I'm correct, Jane, am I in that?
Yes.
And I suspect that you have a huge amount of stories, Jane, do you not?
Yes, and I actually use a lot of my stories in my posts and my client stories and my stories. And just to support what Bob was saying, I get far more engagement when it is the story, and I can track that. And Bob, I'm an engineer as well. There's nothing wrong with us and our spreadsheets.
I love that.
And I do look and see the posts and then see how much engagement. And as soon as I start it with I recall or my client, I can physically feel that I'm getting more responses. So yeah, I use them a lot, and it's worked. I can't say it's always easy. It might take me a bit of time to get the point and find a story and make sure it's still genuine enough, because you can all write stories and make them up, but I like it to be based on something that's genuine, because otherwise they can tell. But no, George, you're right. I've got many stories, and one day, Bob, I'll tell you about being on stage with Jon Snow. Let's put it this way: I got the wrong Jon Snow, so I thought it was the bastard son of Ed, whatever, out of Game of Thrones, but it wasn't. It was only my children pointed out that it was a different Jon Snow. Otherwise, my career would have been short-lived.
Do you feel, Jane, that some of tonight has been useful in terms of structure as well for you?
Oh, I've loved it. I've got so many notes here, and I think it's been really useful because it reinforces some of the things that have been shared in the past, but not with as much explanation, and it's not as clear in terms of understanding. So yeah, I totally got it. So I've got lots of points to take away. And I also like, Bob, the way you relate it to so many things in terms of, you know, we've all got different understandings around your sort of psychology and philosophy, and the fact you bring it all together. So loads of notes, lots to do, and I will be looking Bob up, I suppose.
You better all connect to Bob if you haven't. Yeah,
yes,
amazing.
I will.
You're going to have a group of stalkers.
That's right. Exactly. You're always welcome to drop me emails when you know, if you've got questions.
Bob, we are coming to the end, and I've loved it, and I knew I would, and I'm sure from the feedback you can see it's been helpful to people. I wanted to just finish with, can you please just tell us the actual proper story of Mercury, because I just gave them this weird story at the beginning.
So I was about 6 or 7 years working on Bepi Colombo, which is the European mission to Mercury. Now, it was launched last year. It's done a number of flybys by the moon. It's picking up speed. It did its last flyby by Earth in April, and now it's on a 6-year haul to Mercury, which seems to take a long time since it's almost the same distance as Mars, but Mercury is right next to the sun, and when it gets there, it's got to stop. So we have to be very careful how we send it there, and so it's a longer route. But the bits that I designed are, the spacecraft is built out of 3 bits, and my bits always look relatively small because they hold the 3 bits together. But they had to hold it together on launch, which is the critical phase, and they have to sit there for 6 years, and then in 6 years' time, they're going to press a button and expect them all to release into 3 different orbits. So in 6 years' time, I'll be sat with everything crossed, hoping it all goes well.
I love that, Bob. Bob, Jane just put, where did you work in the chat?
I was at Airbus, what is now Airbus Defence and Space, but it started off when I first started there. I was there 20 years, and it was Astrium when I started.
Right, because I worked at British Aerospace,
Oh,
So
yeah,
did a lot of work on the sort of that. So, and then in terms of Airbus as well. So small world.
yeah. I mean, I worked on contract. I know 20 years is a long time for one contract. It's amazing how you can bury yourself in the organisation if you try. But I worked at British Aerospace Dynamics as well, and MBDA and Marshalls and loads of because this corridor where I live was just absolutely stacked with engineering companies, so it was a perfect place to live for me.
Yeah. Well, I was in Stevenage, so my mum and dad both worked at British Aerospace at some point, and my
Yeah.
dad was the security inspector of security at British Aerospace.
Oh,
After
right.
the sweet shop, Bob, you imagine
Yeah.
that, him in his uniform. I've got a great picture. I'll post it for you. So.
Such a small world. So yeah, I
is.
was aerospace as well. So I can probably guess where we all lived.
Oh, yeah. It's amazing, isn't it? And it's been lovely. I really hope everybody's enjoyed this because obviously it was one of my choices to approach Bob to join us in the membership. And I'm thrilled, Bob, that you have. I love every time I hear you speak, and I learn something new every time I hear you speak. So thank you so, so much.
That's a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you. That was
You
really
want
good.
an email in
Thank
case
you.
anyone's got a question?
Yeah,
Yes,
yeah.
please.
I'll also, Bob, on the Inspiration Salon where I put the recording,
Oh, all
I
right.
will put links to you. So you let me know the best links and I'll put them in there as well. But you put your email in the chat if you like now and people can pick that up.
Yeah, I'll do that, providing I learn to spell quickly.
Yeah, quickly, come on.
There you go.
Bob at bobferguson.co.uk. So you can't forget that. That's
No.
amazing.
No,
Thank you, Bob.
that's why I picked it, so I couldn't forget it.
Thank you so much. Thanks, guys, for coming. It's always wonderful
you.
to do this live as well. So thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Good luck next time,
Bye,
John.
everybody.
Yeah,
Bye.
thanks, Bob. That's been a big help today.
Excellent.
But they'll all be watching and trying to work out whether it's following the story or not.
Yeah, we'll be giving you marks out of 10.
Yeah, it's in some ways it's putting more pressure on.
Not at all. You're in a really safe community. It's going to be amazing. Can't wait,
know.
John. Yeah, so John's on
Cool.
next week, everybody. All about your personal brand, but with the photography expertise coming into play. That's going to be super. He's just done my photos and he's fantastic.
Oh, yeah, I saw your photos.
Yeah.
They were the high street ones. They're brilliant, John.
Yeah. Thank
Yeah, they
you.
were great.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us,
Cool.
guys. See you all
Bye.
soon.
Good
Bye.
one.
Bye.
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 Bye.